Captain Jake Morrison walked slowly down the metal hallway of the UES Harmony, his boots making soft sounds on the floor with each step he took toward the meeting room where humanity's future would be decided today. The diplomatic ship floated, quietly in neutral space between human and Zephyrian territory, far from any sun or planet, just empty blackness outside the thick windows that lined the corridor where he moved forward with heavy thoughts weighing on his mind about what might happen in the next few hours. Ambassador Lisa Grant sat at the long table in the center of the meeting room, her hands folded neatly in front of her as she waited for the alien representatives to arrive and begin what everyone hoped would be the final round of peace talks that had been going on for months, without any real progress being made by either side. She had spent 20 years of her life working as a diplomat, talking to different alien species across the galaxy. But these talks with the Zephyrians had been the hardest ones she had ever been part of, because they seemed to want everything and give nothing back in return. The doors opened with a soft hiss and 3 Zephyrian representatives entered the room, their insect-like bodies moving with quick, jerky motions as they approached the table and took their seats across from the human delegation that had been waiting for them. High Hive Mind Nexus Kethvar, the leader of their group, stood nearly 7 feet tall with 4 arms and compound eyes that reflected the lights in the room as he looked at the humans with what seemed like disgust, or maybe just complete lack of interest in what they had to say. Lisa began the meeting by presenting humanity's latest offer, which included sharing advanced medical technology that could help heal injuries faster than anything the Zephyrians currently had, along with agricultural techniques that could grow more food on less land, and even some territorial concessions that would give the aliens control over 3 human mining colonies that produced valuable metals needed for spacecraft construction. She spoke in a calm voice, explaining each point carefully and hoping that this time the aliens would see that humans were serious about making peace work between their 2 species. Var listened without moving or showing any emotion on his alien face, his compound eyes never blinking as the human ambassador went through each part of the proposal that had taken weeks to prepare and approve by the human government back on Earth. When Lisa finished speaking and sat back down in her chair, the alien leader stood up slowly and began to speak in his strange clicking language that the translation devices changed into words the humans could understand. The collective has considered your words and finds them lacking in proper understanding of your place in the galaxy, Kethvar said, his voice coming through the translator with a cold, mechanical tone that made everyone in the room feel uncomfortable. Humanity will accept vassal status under Zephyrian guidance and submit to our economic control, or face complete isolation from all galactic trade and commerce that keeps your worlds alive and functioning. The words hit the human delegation like a physical blow, and Lisa felt her heart sink as she realized that all their months of negotiation and compromise had been for nothing, because the aliens had never intended to treat humans as equals in any kind of peace agreement. Captain Morrison shifted in his seat and looked at the other human representatives, seeing the same shock and growing anger on their faces that he felt building inside his own chest. Meanwhile, far away, on the agricultural world of New Kansas, farmer Pete Collins stood in his wheat field watching black smoke rise from where his crops had been growing just hours before. Zephyrian enforcement ships had appeared without warning and destroyed everything he had planted and tended for months, claiming that his genetically modified wheat violated some obscure trade regulation that nobody had ever heard of before today. The food from these fields would have fed thousands of people, but now it was all gone, turned to ash and burnt soil that would take years to restore. Similar scenes were happening across human space as Zephyrian ships appeared at colony after colony, destroying property and taking whatever they wanted while claiming it was all legal under trade agreements that seemed to change whenever it suited the aliens. On mining worlds, they seized equipment and declared it contraband, while on manufacturing planets they shut down factories for supposed safety violations that had never been problems before. Back in the meeting room aboard the Harmony, Kethvar continued speaking about humanity's new role as a vassal species, explaining how human children would be taken to collective hive schools for proper education that would teach them to serve the greater good of the galaxy under alien guidance. The translation made his words sound reasonable, but everyone in the room could hear the threat beneath the polite language. Lisa Grant felt something break inside her as she listened to the aliens' demands. This was not negotiation or diplomacy. It was surrender disguised as peace talks. She thought about her own daughter back on Earth, barely 10 years old and full of dreams about becoming a scientist who might discover new worlds or cure diseases. The idea of that bright, curious child being taken away to some alien hive school made her hands shake with anger that she had never felt before in all her years as a diplomat. She stood up slowly, her chair scraping against the floor as she rose, to her full height, and looked directly at Kethavar with eyes that burned with determination. The room fell silent as everyone waited to hear what she would say next, knowing that her words might determine whether there would be peace or war between humans and Zephyrians. "Humanity says enough," Lisa said in a voice that was quiet but carried clearly through the room and would echo across the galaxy in the days to come. "We will not surrender our children. We will not accept vassal status, and we will not submit to your threats anymore." Captain Morrison felt his communication device vibrate with an incoming message and looked down to see activation codes that he had hoped never to receive. All across human space, similar messages were being sent to military commanders and government officials carrying the same simple instruction that would change everything. The talking was over. Admiral Ben Parker stood in the command center of Deep Space Station Alpha, a massive military facility hidden in the shadow of a dead moon that no galactic survey had ever detected because humans had built it using technology that bent light around its hull and made it invisible to most sensors. For 15 years he had waited for this moment, watching as diplomats tried to make peace while he and his teams prepared for the war that everyone hoped would never come, but deep down, knew was inevitable. The activation signal had reached him 3 hours ago, and now the entire hidden fleet was coming alive as crews that had been waiting in suspended animation were awakened and called to their battle stations throughout the facility. Ships that had been built in secret over decades were powering up their engines and weapon systems, ready to emerge from hiding and show the galaxy what humans could do when they stopped trying to be polite and started fighting for their survival. On the industrial world of New Detroit, factory supervisor Carlos Martinez watched as automated systems began converting the massive manufacturing plants from civilian production to military construction with an efficiency that would have impressed even the most advanced alien species. Assembly lines that had been building hovercars and transport ships just yesterday were now producing advanced fighters and bombers that incorporated technology the galaxy had never seen before, using designs that had been hidden in classified databases for years. The workers moved with purpose and determination as they took apart old production equipment and installed new systems that could build weapons of war instead of tools of peace. Carlos had been part of the planning for this conversion since he was first hired at the factory 10 years ago, knowing that someday he might have to help turn his workplace into an engine of destruction that would defend humanity against threats they hoped would never come. Dr. Helen Brooks walked through the underground laboratories of the Human Research Collective, checking on projects that had been classified above top secret and hidden from even the most trusted government officials, because their existence would have been seen as proof that humans were planning for war instead of working for peace. The weapons and technologies being developed in these facilities pushed the boundaries of known physics and would give humanity advantages that no alien species had ever encountered before. Project Prometheus hummed quietly in its containment chamber, a device so powerful that even Helen was not entirely sure what would happen when it was finally activated in combat conditions. The equations suggested it would work as designed, but the scale of destruction it could cause made her hope that it would never be needed, even as she ran final tests to ensure it was ready for deployment if the worst happened. Captain Steve Johnson piloted his reconnaissance vessel UES Falcon through the outer edges of Zephyrian space, using stealth technology to avoid detection, while his sensors gathered intelligence about enemy fleet movements and military preparations. What he saw through his ship's advanced scanning equipment made his blood run cold as he realized just how massive the alien military buildup had become over the past few months, while humans had been distracted by diplomatic negotiations. Hundreds of Zephyrian warships were moving into position near human colonies, forming battle groups that could overwhelm any known human defenses within days of receiving attack orders from the collective leadership. The aliens had been planning this subjugation campaign for years, building up their forces while pretending to negotiate in good faith with human diplomats who thought they were working toward a peaceful solution Intelligence officer Nancy Price sat in her cramped monitoring station aboard a listening post that officially did not exist, intercepting and decoding Zephyrian military communications that revealed the full scope of their plans for humanity. The aliens intended to complete their conquest within 6 months, enslaving the entire human species and redistributing their worlds among collective member species who had supported the war effort. The intercepted messages contained detailed plans for the capture and processing of human prisoners, including instructions for separating children from their families and shipping them to indoctrination facilities where they would be trained to serve their new alien masters. Nancy translated each horrifying document with growing anger, knowing that this intelligence would be used to plan humanity's response to the threat. On Asteroid Belt Station 7, engineer Katie Lee supervised the redirection of mining operations, from commercial ore extraction to military resource gathering, using massive drilling machines to carve raw materials from floating rocks that would be processed into armor plating and weapon components for the growing human war fleet. The asteroid belt contained enough metal and rare elements to build an armada that could challenge any force in the galaxy, if humans had enough time to extract and process the materials. The mining crews worked around the clock in shifts that pushed both humans and machines to their limits, knowing that every hour of delay meant more time for the aliens to complete their own preparations for the coming war. Automated haulers carried processed materials to hidden shipyards, where construction crews were assembling vessels of war with a speed and efficiency that surprised even their own engineers. Other galactic species began to notice that something had changed about humanity as diplomatic contacts suddenly ceased, and human representatives stopped appearing at trade negotiations and cultural exchanges that had been routine for decades. The peaceful species that had always been willing to compromise and accept unfavorable deals had withdrawn from galactic society completely, leaving many alien governments wondering what had caused such a dramatic shift in human behavior. What these observers could not see was the massive mobilization taking place throughout human space, as colonies that had seemed defenseless revealed hidden military facilities and civilian populations that had appeared unprepared for war began training. With weapons that had been secretly stockpiled for years, every human world had been quietly preparing for this moment, while their leaders tried to maintain peace through diplomacy. Colonel Amy Rodriguez activated sleeper agents that had been placed throughout Zephyrian space years ago, men and women, who had lived normal lives as traders and tourists while secretly gathering intelligence and preparing for the day when they would be called upon to strike at enemy targets from within their own territory. The Human Defense Initiative had spent decades placing these assets in positions where they could cause maximum damage when war finally began. As human fleets emerged from their hiding places throughout the galaxy, alien intelligence services began to realize that they had been completely fooled about human military capabilities and intentions. The species they had dismissed as weak and divided possessed advanced technology and a unified command structure that had been hidden behind a facade of peaceful diplomacy for generations. The sleeping giant was waking up, and the galaxy would never be the same again. Captain Tony Davis watched through the reinforced windows of the UES Retribution as the Zephyrian fortress world of Kethamorak appeared on his ship's main display screen, a massive planet covered with military installations and defensive systems that the aliens believed made it impossible to attack or destroy. The world had never fallen to any enemy in over 1,000 years of galactic warfare, and its defenses had been upgraded with the most advanced technology the collective could build. The experimental destroyer floated in space several light minutes, away from the target, far enough to be safe from the fortress world's weapons but close enough for its crew to witness what was about to happen. Tony had served in the human navy for 12 years, but nothing in his experience had prepared him for the weapon system that his ship now carried in its forward compartments. Dr. Helen Brooks had called it a quantum disruption device, explaining that it would cause the atomic bonds holding matter together to simply stop working in a localized area of space. Tony did not pretend to understand the physics involved, but he knew that when the device was activated, everything within its target zone would cease to exist in any meaningful way. The countdown reached 0, and Tony pressed the firing button that would announce humanity's intentions to the entire galaxy. A beam of energy that was invisible to normal sensors reached across the empty space between the Retribution and Kethamorak, touching the fortress world for just a few seconds before the quantum disruption field activated and began its work. At first, nothing seemed to happen, and Tony wondered if the weapon had malfunctioned or failed to operate as designed. Then he noticed that the planet's surface was beginning to blur around the edges, as if someone was erasing it with an invisible brush that removed matter from reality itself. The effect spread outward from the point where the beam had struck, consuming military bases and defensive installations that had protected the world for centuries. Within minutes, the entire planet had been reduced to a cloud of subatomic particles that dispersed into the surrounding space like smoke blown away by an unfelt wind. Where Kethamorak had existed for millions of years, there was now only empty space and the fading glow of energy released by the complete breakdown of matter itself. News of the fortress world's destruction spread through galactic communication, networks faster than light-speed travel, carried by quantum transmitters that connected every major civilization in known space. The impossible had happened, and a planet that everyone believed was invulnerable had simply vanished from existence as if it had never been built at all. Major Ruth Williams led her special operations team through the corridors of a Zephyrian communication facility on the border world of Nexus Prime, moving silently through passages that should have been filled with guards, but were now empty because the aliens were too shocked by the news from Kethamorak to maintain proper security. Her mission was to destroy the hive mind nodes that coordinated collective military operations across this sector of space. The human soldiers moved with deadly efficiency, placing explosive charges on critical systems while avoiding the few alien personnel who were still at their posts, trying to understand how their strongest fortress had been eliminated so completely. Ruth had trained for missions like this for years, but the reality of sabotage operations was more intense than any simulation had prepared her for. Commander Gary Thompson sat in his cyber warfare command center, watching as computer viruses that had been secretly planted in Zephyrian systems years ago suddenly activated and began destroying alien communication networks from within. The viruses had been dormant for so long that collective security systems had forgotten they existed, but now they spread through enemy computers like wildfire, shutting down supply coordination and battle management systems across dozens of worlds. The Zephyrians tried to respond to the cyber attacks, but their programmers discovered that human computer technology was more advanced than they had realized. Every time they thought they had isolated and removed one virus, 3 more would appear and begin attacking different parts of their network infrastructure. High Hive Mind Nexus. Kethvar received reports of the devastating attacks from his command ship at the center of the Grand Armada, a massive fleet of over 2,000 warships that represented the most powerful military force the collective had ever assembled. The destruction of Kethamorak and the coordinated sabotage of communication systems convinced him that humanity posed a greater threat than anyone had imagined. He ordered the Grand Armada to proceed immediately to the human home system of Sol, intending to destroy Earth and end the war before humans could use their mysterious new weapons against other collective worlds. The alien fleet jumped into hyperspace, carrying enough firepower to reduce entire solar systems to cosmic dust. Admiral Patricia Hayes received word that the enemy armada was approaching Earth, and she began implementing Defense Plan Omega, strategy that had been developed years ago but never tested under actual combat conditions. Instead of meeting the aliens in a direct battle that humanity could not win, human forces would execute a fighting retreat that would draw the enemy into a carefully prepared trap. The human evacuation of Earth had begun months ago using a network of hidden jump gates that could transport millions of people to safe colonies throughout human space. By the time the Zephyrian fleet arrived in the Sol system, the homeworld of humanity appeared to be completely abandoned, with no signs of life or military activity anywhere in the system. Keth-Var was suspicious of the empty system, but his intelligence reports insisted that humans lacked the technology for large-scale planetary evacuation and must be hiding somewhere in the asteroid belt or on one of the outer planets. He ordered his ships to spread out and search every possible hiding place where the human population might have taken refuge. Vice Admiral Chris Baker watched from his concealed command ship as Zephyrian vessels moved deeper into the Sol system, taking positions around planets and asteroids while their sensors searched for any trace of human activity. The aliens had no idea that every piece of space debris, every abandoned station, and every seemingly harmless asteroid contained hidden weapon systems that had been installed over decades of secret preparation. The Sol trap had taken 20 years to build, using construction techniques that left no energy signatures or other traces that alien sensors could detect. Thousands of automated weapons platforms had been disguised as natural objects throughout the solar system, waiting for the moment when an enemy fleet would be foolish enough to enter their killing field. When the Zephyrian ships had spread out across the system in their search pattern, Chris activated the trap with a single command that was transmitted simultaneously to every hidden weapon platform in Sol space. Asteroids split open to reveal massive railguns that fired projectiles at a significant fraction of light speed, while abandoned space stations suddenly came alive with energy weapons that could slice through alien hull armor like paper. The Grand Armada found itself caught in a crossfire from every direction, as weapons that had been invisible just moments before began systematically destroying ship after ship with ruthless efficiency. Kethvar tried to order a retreat, but the trap had been designed to prevent escape by jamming hyperspace drives and blocking the exit routes from the system. Within hours, the most powerful fleet in collective history had been reduced to floating wreckage and expanding clouds of superheated gas. The message to the galaxy was clear. Humanity would not be enslaved, and those who tried would face consequences beyond imagination. Fleet Admiral Sandra Clark stood on the bridge of the UES Liberty, flagship of the human battle fleet that was preparing to launch Operation Thunderbolt, a series of lightning campaigns designed to liberate every human colony that had fallen under Zephyrian control and push deep into enemy territory before the collective could recover from the destruction of their Grand Armada at Sol. The victory at Earth had given humanity a temporary advantage, but Sandra knew that the aliens would eventually regroup and counterattack if given enough time. The human fleet consisted of over 500 warships that had emerged from hidden construction facilities throughout human space, each vessel equipped with advanced weapons and defensive systems that incorporated technology the galaxy had never seen before. Sandra had spent her entire career preparing for this moment, studying alien military tactics and developing strategies that would allow humanity to fight and win against superior numbers. General Frank Miller walked through the training facilities on New Texas, where the newly formed Human Liberation Corps was preparing for ground combat operations on dozens of worlds simultaneously. These soldiers came from every walk of human life: farmers who had lost their crops to alien enforcement actions, teachers whose schools had been closed by collective regulations, engineers whose factories had been seized by enemy forces, and artists whose work had been banned by alien censors. Each member of the Liberation Corps carried personal motivation that went beyond simple military duty, fighting not just for victory but for the right of their species to exist as free beings in a galaxy that had tried to reduce them to slaves. Frank had never commanded troops with such determination and focus, and he knew that this combination of skill and passion would make them nearly unstoppable on any battlefield. The first target of Operation Thunderbolt was the mining world of Kepler-7, where Zephyrian forces had been extracting rare metals from human colonists who were forced to work as unpaid laborers in conditions that killed dozens of people every day. Captain Roy Adams led the logistics ships that would supply the Liberation Force, while Major Linda Thompson commanded the assault troops who would free the prisoners and drive the aliens from the planet. The attack began with precision orbital strikes that destroyed Zephyrian command centers and communication facilities before enemy forces could call for reinforcements or coordinate their defense. Human soldiers dropped from transport ships directly into the mining complexes, using advanced weapons and tactics to overwhelm alien guards who had not expected such a swift and powerful response. The liberation of Kepler-7 was completed within 6 hours, and similar operations were taking place simultaneously across dozens of other worlds as human forces struck at enemy positions throughout the galaxy. Each victory brought more human colonies back under their own control and demonstrated to other species that the tide of the war had turned completely in humanity's favor. Ambassador Vextar of the Saurian Republic met secretly with human diplomat Jennifer Stone on the neutral trading station of Crossroads, discussing the possibility of covert support for humanity's war effort against the Zephyrian collective. The reptilian species had suffered under alien economic policies for decades, forced to sell their resources at artificially low prices while buying manufactured goods at costs that kept their worlds in poverty. The Saurians could not openly support humanity without risking retaliation from other collective member species, but they could provide intelligence about Zephyrian troop movements and supply lines that would help human forces plan their campaigns more effectively. Jennifer negotiated carefully with Vextar, knowing that this alliance could be the beginning of a broader coalition against collective oppression. Dr. Maria Santos, humanity's leading expert on alien psychology, studied captured Zephyrian communications and discovered that the hive mind structure that controlled their society was not as unified as most species believed. Different subnodes within the collective had competing priorities and conflicting goals that could be exploited by skilled psychological warfare specialists who understood how to turn alien units against each other. Lieutenant Colonel Dan Evans used this research to develop tactics that caused confusion and panic among enemy forces by broadcasting false orders and contradictory information that made different Zephyrian commanders believe they were receiving instructions from higher authority. The aliens began fighting among themselves as much as they fought against human forces, weakening their overall effectiveness and creating opportunities for human victory. The Aquatic Hydros Federation quietly opened their space lanes to human supply ships, allowing Admiral Sandra Clark to establish forward bases and refueling stations that extended the range of human military operations far beyond what the collective had thought possible. Captain Michelle Clark, the Admiral's daughter, commanded one of the supply convoys that used hydrospace to reach human forces fighting on the far side of enemy territory. The Federation had never forgotten how the Zephyrians had polluted their ocean worlds with industrial waste during the early years of collective expansion, and they saw humanity's war as an opportunity to gain revenge against the aliens who had damaged their environment and then refused to pay compensation for the ecological destruction they had caused. The turning point of the entire war came at the Battle of Seven Suns, where Commodore Linda Thompson's task force encountered 3 separate Zephyrian fleets that had been sent to retake the liberated worlds and drive human forces back to their own territory. The aliens outnumbered the humans by more than 3-1 and expected an easy victory that would demonstrate collective military superiority. Instead, they found themselves facing human ships that could fight at longer ranges and maneuver faster than anything in their own fleet, using weapons that penetrated alien armor and defensive systems with devastating effectiveness. Linda coordinated her ships with precision that amazed even her own officers, directing the battle like a conductor leading an orchestra through a complex musical performance. The first Zephyrian fleet was destroyed within the opening hour of combat, its ships torn apart by human railgun fire and energy weapons that overwhelmed their defensive screens. The second fleet tried to retreat, but was intercepted by human fighters that had been launched from carriers positioned at the edge of the system, while the third fleet found itself trapped between Linda's main force and reinforcements that arrived through a jump gate that the aliens had not detected. When the battle ended 6 hours later, over 400 alien warships had been destroyed or disabled, while human losses totaled fewer than 20 vessels. The victory was broadcast throughout the galaxy by news services that could hardly believe what they were reporting. Humanity had defeated 3 major enemy fleets simultaneously and established complete control over an entire sector of space. Other galactic powers began to realize that they had completely underestimated human military capabilities and political unity. The species they had dismissed as weak and divided had become the strongest force in known space, capable of challenging any alliance that might be formed against them. Some alien governments quietly began exploring the possibility of switching sides in the war, while others prepared their own defenses against the possibility of human expansion into their territory. The war was far from over, but the momentum had shifted decisively in humanity's favor, and everyone in the galaxy knew it. General Paul Rivera stood on the command platform overlooking the final Zephyrian stronghold on the fortress world of Nexus Central, watching as human artillery pieces fired their last rounds into the alien defensive positions that had held out against siege operations for 3 weeks. The combined arms assault that would end collective resistance was about to begin, using ground troops, air support, and orbital bombardment in a coordinated attack that would crush the remaining enemy forces once and for all. The fortress, had been built into the side of a mountain using construction techniques that the aliens had perfected over centuries of warfare. But human engineers had found weaknesses in its design that could be exploited by weapons that the collective had never encountered before. Paul had spent his entire military career studying how to break seemingly impregnable defenses, and this battle would be the ultimate test of everything he had learned. The assault began at dawn with a massive bombardment from human ships in orbit above the planet, their weapons targeting specific structural points that would cause the fortress to collapse from within, rather than simply blasting through its outer walls. Ground forces moved forward under cover of the artillery barrage, using advanced armor and personal weapons to overwhelm alien defenders who had been stunned by the precision and power of the human attack. Within 12 hours, the last organized Zephyrian military force in the galaxy had surrendered, and the war that had consumed both species for over a year was finally over. Paul accepted the surrender of Hive Commander Zethkar, the highest-ranking alien officer still alive, in a ceremony that was broadcast to every world in known space, as proof that the collective's power had been broken forever. President Claire. Washington addressed the unified Earth government from the capital city of Geneva, announcing the human doctrine that would guide humanity's actions in the post-war galaxy. Never again would humans submit to alien oppression, and never again would any species be allowed to subjugate another through force or economic coercion. The speech was transmitted to every inhabited world, carrying a message that some species found inspiring, while others found terrifying. The old galactic order based on military strength and economic exploitation was ending, and a new system founded on principles of freedom and cooperation was taking its place. Claire knew that many alien governments would resist these changes, but humanity now possessed the military power to enforce their vision of how civilized species should treat each other in a galaxy where everyone deserved the chance to live. Free from oppression. Captain Michelle Clark, daughter of the famous Fleet Admiral Sandra Clark, established the first human protectorate world on the former Zephyrian slave planet of Kethdar, where beings from dozens of different species had been forced to work in conditions that killed thousands every year. The planet would become a symbol of humanity's commitment to protecting the weak and giving former slaves the chance to rebuild their lives in freedom. The transformation of Kethdar required massive resources and careful planning, but human engineers and doctors worked alongside former prisoners to clean up the environmental damage caused by years of industrial exploitation and establish new cities where people could live with dignity. Michelle coordinated the relief efforts while also maintaining security against any remaining collective loyalists who might try to sabotage the reconstruction. Admiral Kevin Stone supervised the systematic dismantling of Zephyrian war fleets throughout the galaxy, but instead of simply destroying the captured ships, human engineers converted them into humanitarian vessels that would spread medical technology and agricultural techniques to worlds that had been devastated by the war. The weapons that had once been used to oppress other species were transformed into tools that would help heal the damage caused by decades of collective policies. The conversion process required advanced knowledge of alien technology and careful attention to safety protocols. But human scientists had learned much about Zephyrian engineering during the war and were able to modify the ships for peaceful purposes. Kevin took personal satisfaction in seeing weapons of oppression transformed into instruments of healing and hope. Dr. Alan Cooper worked with newly free-thinking Zephyrians like Kethzar to develop new forms of interspecies cooperation that would prevent future conflicts and promote understanding between different forms of life. The breakdown of the hive mind structure had freed individual aliens to think for themselves for the first time in their lives, and many were eager to explore what it meant to be independent beings capable of making their own choices. The research was challenging because it required understanding psychology and social structures that no one had studied before, but Alan found that former collective drones were often more creative and innovative than anyone had expected once they were released from the mental control that had dominated their entire species for thousands of years. Representatives from across the galaxy gathered on New Geneva for the signing of the Universal Species Accords, a treaty that would establish new rules for interspecies relations based on respect for individual rights and the principle that no civilization had the right to impose its will on others through force. Ambassador Rachel Davis, granddaughter of farmer Pete Collins, whose crops had been destroyed in the opening days of the war, addressed the assembly as humanity's chief negotiator. Rachel spoke about the journey that had brought all the assembled species to this moment, from the arrogance and oppression of the old system to the possibility of a future where different forms of life could coexist peacefully while maintaining their unique cultures and traditions. Her words carried the moral authority that humanity had earned through their victory over tyranny and their commitment to using power responsibly. The signing ceremony was attended by leaders from over 200 different species, many of whom had never met each other before because the collective had deliberately kept them isolated and dependent on alien mediation for all interspecies contact. The new accords would allow direct communication and cooperation between civilizations that shared common interests and values. The story concluded with a scene that mirrored its beginning, but with a fundamental change in the balance of power. Captain Jake Morrison, now promoted to admiral and serving as humanity's senior military representative, sat at the head of the negotiating table while alien representatives competed for the chance to gain humanity's favor and support for their own causes. The species that had once been dismissed as weak and primitive had become the galaxy's moral authority, with the military power to enforce their vision of justice and the wisdom to use that power in service of freedom rather than conquest. Jake remembered the day when Ambassador Lisa Grant had stood up to the Zephyrians and declared that humanity would say enough to oppression, and he smiled as he realized how completely the galaxy had changed. The final image was of children from dozens of different species playing together in the Central Park of New Geneva, their games supervised by human peacekeepers who ensured that the young beings could grow up in a galaxy where their differences were celebrated rather than feared. Humanity had not just won a war against the Zephyrian collective, they had won the future for every species that valued freedom over security and cooperation over domination. The galaxy would never again see the rise of an empire based on the oppression of others, because humanity would be watching and ready to act whenever tyranny raised its head. The species that had said enough to injustice had become the guardians of liberty for all intelligent life in known space.